hang on. Is it working? Hello, my fellow educators and language nerds. It's Kate from the Living Room English Conversation School, and you're watching The Breakdown. The Breakdown is my new series where I talk about some of the most popular and well-known learning theories out there and break them down and analyze them and share some tips for how to make or unmake them part of your everyday pedagogy and curriculum. So whether you're a rookie teacher looking for some advice or a veteran educator looking to spice things up a bit, The Breakdown is a chance for you to get introspective and reflective about your classroom pedagogies and different ways that you can use these learning theories in them. So as you educators know, each assessment, activity, lecture, whatever it is made with intention. But with the flurry of grading and homework and teaching and everything we have to do as educators, we sometimes forget to take a step back and reflect and evaluate whether or not these activities and assessments that we do actually fit with our own personal teaching and learning pedagogies. So here at The Breakdown is your chance to take a look at your own educational philosophy and whether or not the strategies and activities you're using in your classroom actually align with what you believe in, so that you can serve your students most effectively. So today's topic is big bad behaviorism. Okay, so it's not really bad. It's actually still quite prevalent in education, especially in classroom management, but I just like the alliteration. So, what is behaviorism? Behaviorist theory defines learning as a change in behavior. So, put simply, if a student exhibits a behavior change based on some sort of stimuli, that means learning has occurred. How does this behavior change or learning occur? Like I said, it depends on some sort of stimulus and the following response, or the behavior change, which occurs with some sort of conditioning. You might have heard of this very famous experiment done by Pavlov with some dogs, if that rings any bells. No pun intended. Basically what happened was the scientists wanted to see if they could create some conditioned response from these dogs. So if a dog is going to see food, obviously they're going to start salivating and want to eat it. But the scientists decided to create some other kind of stimulus that has nothing to do with the food, which was ringing a bell. He wanted to know that if he rang a bell, if that would create a response in the dogs to get them to know that food was coming. Over time, the scientists conditioned the dogs to know that if a bell was ringing, that meant food. Whether or not food was present, the dogs would start salivating. Thus, there was a behavior change. A completely outside and neutral stimulus, the ringing bell, became synonymous with food, and therefore the dogs would know it was time to eat. In behaviorism, many theorists assert that humans are born as a blank slate. I think that could be a really good Taylor Swift parody about this. I've got a blank slate, baby. So, over time, your environment and the stimuli within your environment mold and shape who you are and how you behave. This molding is called conditioning. So going back to the Pavlov's dog experiment, the dogs were conditioned to salivate and know that food was coming whenever they heard the bell. So let's break down stimulus and response for a second. Stimulus is an object or event that influences how a person behaves. This might be in the form of giving praise. So for example, if you told a student, "Good job for answering a question," this is an example of stimulus. Then there's response. So after giving that praise to that student, the student may continue to turn in good work. This would be a subsequent behavior change as they continue to turn in good work after that initial praise. Conditioning is then, after a series of stimulus and response patterns, the person internalizes and continues the response, i.e., a behavior change. So this gets us into reinforcement. First of all, what's reinforcement? A reinforcement is a consequence that will subsequently increase a particular behavior, and that behavior can be the desirable behavior or an undesirable behavior. There are two types of reinforcements, positive and negative, and here's where it gets a little bit tricky. Positive doesn't necessarily mean good, and negative doesn't necessarily mean bad, but rather, positive reinforcement would be adding some sort of stimulus, where negative is taking it away in order to increase a certain behavior. Ideally, a desirable behavior, but sometimes reinforcement can cause undesirable behaviors to continue. An example of positive reinforcement would be giving praise to a student who starts turning their homework in on time. Amazing! That's so good! Do it like that one more time and you've got it. This praise is a stimulus that reinforces that good behavior that you want to increase. They know that if they turn in their homework on time, they will get praise, and it's a stimulus for them to respond in that desirable behavior. On the other hand, sometimes teachers can reinforce undesirable behavior. For example, perhaps you have a rowdy student, and so you call attention to them to make them stop being rowdy, but that only increases their undesirable behavior. Perhaps giving them that attention is what they're looking for, and so they know that if they act up, they're going to get attention, so they continue to do that undesirable behavior, which has been reinforced by the teacher's attention. So what would be an example of negative reinforcement that takes a stimulus away? Perhaps you have a student who constantly turns in their homework late, and the teacher constantly scolds them in front of the class. Maybe there's one day that student brings their homework in on time, and rather than giving them that angry look or scold, the teacher gives them praise instead. In this case, you're taking away that anger, hence the negative reinforcement, so the student now feels good about turning their homework in on time, knowing that if they turn it in on time, they won't be scolded and berated in front of the class. So we have reinforcements, but on the other side is punishment. And again, it can be both positive and negative. In this case, positive punishment would be giving something extra in order to lower an undesirable behavior. For example, a student isn't turning their homework in, you give them extra homework or you give them an extra task to do. That would be an example of a positive punishment in which you add something in order to lower their undesirable behavior of not turning in their homework. On the flip side of that is negative punishment. In this case, it would be taking something away. So say your student is doing an undesirable behavior in class, maybe you take them away and put them on a timeout. Here, you're taking away their chance to interact with their peers and do an activity, so they have to sit by themselves. You are again taking them out of that situation. This would be an example of negative punishment. Do your homework or no dessert. Going back to reinforcers, there are two types of reinforcers. The first is a primary reinforcer, which is basically your basic needs of life, which would be food, water, and clothing. The other type of reinforcers are secondary reinforcers, which are learned reinforcers, and that might be good grades, giving a sticker, giving some sort of praise, or something like that. I say these are learned reinforcers because students get accustomed to them over time and realize the value in them at varying levels. Some students may value grades a lot, others might not so much. Secondary reinforcers can take different forms, such as a concrete reinforcer, which might be a sticker or a prize or a toy of some sort. Reinforcers can also be social, such as giving praise to a student who is doing well, or even a friendly gesture like a smile or a pat on the back. Lastly, a reinforcer can even be an activity, where students have to do a certain activity before they're allowed to do the activity they really like or want to do. This gives them incentive to get that first activity done so that they can have their own activity afterwards that they enjoy doing. So what does this look like in our classrooms? Many of us have probably used or continue to use some form of behaviorist theory in the classroom, maybe in terms of classroom management or behavioral problems. But there are many psychologists and educators that are critical of this theory in terms of academic and real cognitive learning. Over the years, there's been a significant shift away from behaviorism and more towards cognitive or sociocultural theory, which I talk about in my other videos, and that is because of some of the limitations of behaviorist theory. So, what are these limitations? One limitation would be the idea of motivation. So, many educators often use a reward system in order to motivate their students, and while this may work to an extent, this external motivation in the form of a reward or a prize in the long run might be less motivating to students than, say, their own intrinsic motivation or their motivation from themselves. In addition, This type of external motivation, like a prize or reward, might make the student try to get the task done as quickly as possible so that they can get the prize, making it more like a task to get done rather than a fulfilling learning experience. In addition, although behaviorism can be good for some classroom management issues, it doesn't take into account individual students' cognitive abilities, and rather focuses on learning as repetitions of learned behavior and patterns, rather than critical thinking for oneself and a deeper understanding of consequences. This can be detrimental, especially for students with cognitive deficiencies who may be lacking the cultural or background knowledge of their peers, or who are at a lower skill proficiency level than their classmates. In these cases, it's not necessarily their behavior that's holding them back, but other deeper cognitive factors that the teacher needs to take into account. So what does this mean for you? Do you ever use behaviorist theory in your classroom? How do you feel about it? What are some of the strategies that you found beneficial or not so good that you've used in your classroom in the past? How do you feel about behaviorism in general? Leave comments below and keep the discussion going. Got an idea or critique? Leave your comments below. And don't forget to tune in next time for cognitive theory.